With the establishment now of the Spanish in the New World, building their colonies after 1492, the time has come to take a closer look at some of the more famous Spanish conquerors, conquistadores, that will be mentioned in many of the readings that you're going to look at. The two we're going to look at this time are going to be Hernan Cortes, who will lead an expedition into modern-day Mexico, and then the Pizzaro brothers, who are going to be spending some time traveling and controlling areas in what you know as modern-day Peru and Ecuador. But let's start with a quick thing here. One of the things that usually influences the way a significant number of Western civilization textbooks take a look at the experience of the Spanish in the New World, there was created what was called black legend. It was the idea that oftentimes emphasized all the worst things, the most negative and violent things in the Spanish colonial experience after 1492. That sort of like when we talked about the Reformation earlier, a lot of the focus is on the squeaky wheels, the Protestants who were going against the normal system, and then afterwards we kind of have a conversation about what the Catholics had done. In the same case here, in the legend of what Spain did in the New World, oftentimes the focus is on the negative, on the worst of the worst, and it's one of the things that we got to take a look at and understand. Now, when we take a look at the story of someone like Cortes, we are going to have some aspects of the black legend move forward, but let's start with this. All right. Cortes is an adventurer. There's many different adventurous men who leave Spain in the time period after Columbus's first voyage and into the next couple of centuries. Many of them military officers or low-level nobles called hidalgos, people who are somehow looking for that next adventure. They're sort of a combination entrepreneur and maybe pirate and con man. But nonetheless, they're going to the New World looking for that next experience, looking for that road to wealth and fame and fortune, and the opportunities of this huge frontier attract them. Cortes and several of his soldiers who are on the island of Cuba are told on no uncertain terms to leave. He does, because he's jumping on the legend that there is this wonderful empire on the mainland in which you know is modern-day Mexico that has just overflowing wealth, and it's amazing. So Cortes and his men sail to what you know is modern-day Mexico. He burns the ships they came on because he wants to make sure everyone's committed to the mission, and they, with some of the local Native American allies, start marching up into the area controlled by the Aztec Empire under the Emperor Moctezuma. All right? Montezuma in some American translations of his name. But the idea here is a small band of very committed Spaniards are going into an area that probably has over 20 million Native American peoples living and working in what is known as the Aztec Empire, but there's also other nations around the Aztecs who are not controlled by them. There's a series of native wars that are already taking place, but now the Spaniards are sort of injecting themselves into this scenario. And by 1521, they've been able to go and conquer and control most of what you know was Mexico. And in part, it was through military violence. In part, it was through some factors of luck. One of the things being that within the religious belief system of the Aztecs, there's a story of a god coming back on a white cloud from the direction of the east. Maybe that fits the same kind of idea as white-looking Spaniard conquistadors coming on ships with large white sails out of the east. There's lots of things to think about here, but he does benefit from the idea that he's not seen just simply as a man who's a conqueror. He's seen somehow as an omen or as somehow directly controlled or connected to the gods for some. There's some general confusion. Take a look at the way the book describes this, but essentially through some military use, through the very creative alliance that he has with other Native Americans who are opposed to the Aztec Empire, and increasingly smallpox. Another one of the things that will be part of the Columbian Exchange is the Europeans bring smallpox to the New World, a disease that many of the people in the New World have virtually no immunity to, and the die-off is colossal. So that in terms of having a small group of Spaniards take on an entire multi-million empire, these factors come into play. And in any case, Hernan Cortes, through a series of both lucky as well as strategic moves, does manage to seize control over the whole Aztec Empire and then impose his will on it and extract the wealth from it. All right? That legend of, you know, the simple man using his skills, his military acumen, going off and conquering a chunk of the world, that is the vision that's happening in the world of Cortes, and he's a real example. Now, Pizzaro will also do the same thing. So here is a picture of Cortes, in this case obviously showing himself to be a very proper Spanish gentleman. He does go back after he makes his fortune in Mexico to live again in peninsular Spain. He gets a title of nobility and lives out a life of great luxury and ease, and is sort of in reward for what he has done for the Spanish crown. Because remember, everything that the Spanish conquistadors and Spanish settlers get involved with, there is some payback to the royal family in terms of taxes and other things. To the south, there's the legend of a large empire in the Andes Mountains. And the Pizzaro brothers are going to be going off and taking on the idea. They travel further south. They hear the legends of what's happening in this empire of the Incas. It is a very large empire, much like the Aztec one. It was highly integrated and controlled by a central series of decisions, and they have a very complex what's called a vertical economy, where the whole empire is stitched together by roads and a network of messengers and couriers. And Pizzaro and his men are able to come in and once again, in search of great wealth, get paid essentially in gold to try to be bribed to go away. Once again, there's an internecine civil war amongst the Incan royal families. There's lots of brothers going after brothers and half-brothers trying to kill each other. There's then a smallpox outbreak, and then of course there's the influence of the Spanish violence. Either way, both Cortes in Mexico and Pizzaro and the other people in Peru are able then, with small numbers of very committed people, able to topple major empires and then assume control over these areas, large populations, large rural areas, large areas of agricultural production, but also gold, silver, and other portable wealth. And in each case, they're going to be staying and trying to maximize control of these areas, invite more Spanish settlers to come in, and that process of having the Spanish control all that is will move forward. Okay? What will also happen, though, is that in each of these cases, as they send out massive amounts of gold and silver and jewels, starting now and into the next couple of centuries, that massive influx of gold and silver into Europe is going to cause massive inflation. It's going to also create all kinds of problems with economic thinking because things become more dear. There's just more gold and silver chasing after the same amount of goods, and any economy, that's going to create inflation and destabilize things. It's also going to create a Spanish government that in many ways will continue to spend next year's tax revenue this year. In other words, they're going to start a process because they have so much gold and silver coming in, saying, well, I'll pay for it next year. Give me the money now to do whatever I want to do, and I'll pay you back when the silver and gold comes in. That kind of thing essentially is what we might equate with the idea of living on a credit card, right? You're going to put it on your credit card, you'll pay for it later with the idea that you will, but in the case of Spain, as they move forward, their debts are going to get so deep that they will have a problem. Now, the last thing to think about here is that as the Spanish were doing this in the New World, there are many people who are starting to have a problem with how the Spanish settlers are dealing with the native indigenous peoples. Here's the idea. Are native indigenous peoples rightfully humans? Do they have human rights? Should they be treated as humans, or are they natural slaves? Until they are fully Christianized, are they somehow a subhuman set? Now, in many places, the Spaniards and Portuguese are going to use many indigenous peoples essentially as slaves, thinking that they had been conquered in war as prisoners of war or justifying it in some way. There are many religious thinkers, though, in the 16th century who are saying, well, wait a second. Are these people automatically slaves? Can they automatically be treated differently than everybody else? Friar Bartolomeo de las Casas is one of the most famous ones. He will spend a significant amount of time in Cuba and Guatemala and other places in the New World. He will articulate the idea that indigenous peoples are humans too, who are entitled to human rights, and in many ways go back to the court in Spain, go back to the royal family in Spain, and testify on behalf of indigenous peoples and try to get them accorded the same kind of rights and responsibilities and protections as any other subject of the king who is in Spain. That will be a very difficult issue for many people because the Spanish idea of profiting in the New World is oftentimes driven by the exploitation of labor. First, indigenous peoples, and increasingly as they die off due to smallpox and other things, they're going to be looking for more labor, and this is going to open the door for massive importation of African slaves. And we'll be coming to that in a couple of future lectures here. But what we have then is with Cortes, we have the ultimate in Conquistador and Pizzaro as well. Take a look at this time period in your reading. Notice the ideas of what's happening in terms of an extension of the Columbian Exchange, in this case diseases. And also take a look at the ability here of many of the Europeans to be able to exploit large numbers of indigenous people in warfare by playing them against each other and taking advantage of some of the pre-existing animosities, in which case the Spanish could sort of be the brokers. Also take a look and see if there's some things in the sample exam area that can help you understand this area.